to make our lighting a bit nicer, what we have to do is adjust these area lights that we created earlier. So I'm going to jump into our work camera here. And so I just did that by toggling that camera icon. And so what you notice is we're getting a little bit of this ugly shadowing happening. And so to get rid of that, we can move the lights around and change camera position if we need to. But the other thing we can do is increase the scale of our lights. So one of the things to note is that the smaller your light source is, the harder of an edge your shadow will have. So if I increase the size of this, and I'm just pressing S to do that, what you'll notice is that the shadow that's produced is much softer. Okay, and so what we could do is maybe reduce the size of this one, maybe bring it up a bit, and we're actually trying to lay a little bit of light across the top here. We could actually move this to the side a bit. It really depends on what you're trying to light. Okay, so maybe we wanted to light, right here, something like that to catch a highlight, or maybe we want to lay light across the top here. So you have to really position that to be focused in the right spot. And we can change this if we want. So with it selected, we could come up to the settings over here and choose spot. And spot gives you this cone, and you can actually change the size of that cone here. So let's just bring the cone, excuse me, that's not the right one. Let's try the spot shape size. That looks like it's the right setting. And so you can maybe angle that up a bit. And let's increase the power to 200 may be a little low. Let's see if we can get some light. Okay, so let's disable this. Let's try 1,000. Okay, let's jump back into our render view here. All right, so our shadows overall are a little bit cleaner. We're not getting those hard shadow edges like we were getting before. All right, so I think what might be helpful is if I try to look at our reference image. Okay, so here is the side reference image and the front reference image. We can see that the background is much brighter. In our scene, there's a lot of gray happening. Overall, there's more light, so we know that we need to adjust our lights to be brighter. And I think one of the things we can try to do is to create an additional light for the scene that also lights up the background. Because we're lighting up just this small area, we're not really getting any light to the background here. So there's all sorts of ways you can do that. I'm going to try to add another light, and it will just be a sun. And a sun is a directional light that just casts light everywhere in a particular direction. So if you press R to rotate this, you can see it's just going to take all the light and shoot it that direction, and so we're generating this really long shadow. But it's doing that everywhere evenly. And so I think we want this to go straight down. So the default position is pretty good. And let's jump back in. Okay, so it's much brighter, tons of light now in the scene. Whenever you add light, it's going to take longer to render, so just keep that in mind. But we're getting much brighter light. Let's see if we turn off our area lights. Okay, you can see that our object is still really dark. So it's good that we have these lights, but we're creating this really dark, awful shadow here. So we could do a couple things. We could adjust the light settings. And so I have light selected here. So let's just zoom in and take a look. Okay, so remember I said before, if you increase the size, that it will essentially soften that up. And that's also true for the sun. But we could also just say, don't cast a shadow. And so that eliminates it entirely. But I think it's also overpowering our other light's ability to cast a shadow. So there's almost too much light in the scene for that. So if we go ahead and re-enable that, and if we bring our angle way up here, you can see it's really softened that out. It's still pointed down, so it's not the position or the direction of the light, but the angle here is going to make it so that it gives us a much softer shadow. Okay, so that's looking better. Let's maybe bump the strength up to 1.2. And okay, let's go here to our ground. And if we take a look here at our material settings, you can see that it's just got the default material on it. There's no material actually created. So we're going to click on new. And there's a few things that I want to kind of disable here in our principled shader. So if we go down to roughness, roughness is going to control the specularity value. Basically, anywhere there's a bright spot will be specular. So I'm going to increase that to 1. And that should help make things a bit more even. Let's go ahead and do another render, and I want to change my render settings. The sampling here to be, we'll just do 128 for now. We'll do a higher sampling at the end. I just want to see if our lighting is working out for us. Okay, you can see we're still getting a hard shadow that we weren't really able to see before. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I was a bit confused. I was getting a hard light here. And when you go over to the outline, you'll see that there is some toggles I had created already, or I had set up, where we had sort of the selection filter icon. So I, was disabling the ability to select. And then, the eyeball icon here sort of turns things on and off, but there's actually a render icon. And so if we go down here, we can see that that default light in the scene is still enabled in the render. If I turn that off, let's see if that resolves my shadow. Okay, and I can see here, even though the render isn't finished, that it's eliminated that ugly kind of hard edged shadow. And so you have to be really careful. You have to go in and enable that render icon. So overall, my lighting is pretty flat here. I'm going to go ahead and undo some of these changes I made. So let's scale this down. And go ahead and scale that one down a bit. And scale this down. Sorry, reduce the size. Let's go ahead and see if we can move the spotlight here in a position that's going to work for us. So I'm going to go ahead and also jump into look development mode. And so this is sort of your texture shading view. So it's also called the material preview mode. And so what I'm noticing here is that I'm not really getting light on the back here. So I've really got to try to fix this. And let's jump back into okay, so I've just angled this down, really trying to cover this surface with light. Now I can see I'm starting to paint this with light much more clearly. I'm trying to be careful not to cast any shadows here, but let's jump into our render camera. I mean, I might not even see the light from that angle, so let's maybe make it a bit more top down. Okay, and we will go maybe see what we can do about this light. So that's only 80, that's pretty good. Let's jump this up to 700 watts. So we'll go ahead and change our settings here. 250 is pretty good for my scene. I don't really think I'm going to get much better results over that value, so I'm going to set that to 250 and go ahead and render. So I skipped us ahead so that you didn't have to wait for that to render out. And okay, so that looks like a pretty good quality render. Our light is pretty decent. We're getting this specularity happening here on this rounded part of the seat, and we're getting some nice highlights in certain parts of our object. And so if you don't have a bevel here, depending on your model, you might not really see these, but these are what really helps sell the look of a render like this. Okay, so I will just save this to slot 2 and just choose slot 3 here, and the next time we do a render it'll save here. Okay, so I could stop there, but I really want to make this leather feel more like leather and less like this plastic kind of material. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to shading view, and let's select our object here. Now, this is the shader view of our material. And if you come down here to materials, you'll see that I added that leather image here to our color channel through this property on the side. But in shading view, you can actually see nodes, and you can bring in images and plug them into different parts. So I'm going to choose the leather material textures that will correspond to these other channels. So here I am on cc0textures.com, and this is where I originally got my leather texture. So I'm going to just scroll down. Actually, I'll just type in leather here and see what comes up. So I believe this is the one that I had used. So I'm going to choose this, and I'm going to download this leather pack here. Okay, so I have my leather textures here. And so this one is what you see applied now, and that's essentially just a color channel. And so if we look at these other ones, we have something called displacement, and it's in the actual file name of the image. We also have something called normal, and we have something called roughness. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up my normal and my roughness. I'm not going to really do anything with displacement. That's a bit more advanced. If I take each image and drop it into the shader view here, you can see it automatically creates an image node. If you want to add the node manually, you can just go to add. We can search for image, and then it will add a blank image node. I'm going to press X to get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and we're just going to rearrange these. It helps to be, okay, I accidentally selected off, so I'm going to select that again. Helps to be organized. So let's go ahead and plug our roughness into our roughness. You can see here, there's something called roughness, which corresponds to the file name. And our normal map, you might think that all you do is plug this into normal, but that's actually not right. A normal map is not color information in the same way that these two are. In fact, roughness isn't really color information. Roughness just uses black and white values to map where roughness is kind of turned on or off. And so leather normal map here will tell the shader engine where the material has sort of physical topological changes in the surface. In order to get this texture to work, we need to add a normal map node. So we will plug color into color and then normal into normal. We're not done. So this normal map doesn't use sRGB, it uses non-color data. And so it won't work necessarily without that information. And we can also use our UV map here. So I'm going to select that from the dropdown just to make sure our normal map is mapping to our object's UV. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do. Let's just take a look at what it looks like now. Okay, so now we can see there's sort of a sheen happening, but it looks bumpy. So it's sort of corresponding to the top ridges of the leather. And there's also a bit of, it looks kind of sculpted now. And that's because if we just unplug our normal, you can see our normal map is actually helping to generate that bump for us. So I'm going to plug that back in. You can see the effect. That's actually a bit too bumpy for me. So I'm going to press Shift and just reduce the strength slowly, just so it starts to read a little bit, but not so it's overkill. Let's take a look at what that looks like in the renderer. Okay, that's becoming a little bit better. If you want, you can actually adjust the roughness by making it more contrasty. And so if I do Shift A to add, we can search for a color ramp and just drop that in between. And a color ramp is essentially applies a gradient to your existing color that's coming in. So you have an image with color, and that color comes into the color ramp, and then the color ramp can assign new colors to the image. And so I'm just going to bring these together a little bit, and that will increase the contrast. So if I was to plug this, for instance, in the base color, just so you can see what's happening, and I'm going to turn on our material view here, just to make it go a little bit faster. You can see I'm just increasing the contrast of that. But I don't want to do it too much, so let's see, I just want to bring the black maybe into here. Okay, I think that's going to work, so let's just give that a try. And actually it looks a little bit wet, so let's maybe back off on the white a little bit and just back that up. Okay. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I only needed to adjust it a little bit. You might not need to adjust yours at all. Okay, so let's do the same thing for this. I'm going to locate that normal map node and just drop it in between. Make sure you're using your UVs by selecting it and choosing it here. And again, 1 for me is a little bit too strong, so I'm going to back that down. Maybe to something like that. And maybe this is, I think 0.3 might be my setting, but you know, you can just make your own choice there. Okay. That looks good. And so what you can see is if we look at our highlight here, that's on this curve. So that's coming from our key light. you can see there's just a little bit more detail happening. It doesn't look quite so flat, and it's really nicely spreading out through these normal map details. And we can get our surface reflection and our specularity here happening, but in a way where it isn't solid. It's a bit broken up over that texture. So that's going to add the realism that we're looking for. So I will just do another render. Okay, so it looks like we've just finished rendering here. And I just want to show the difference between our previous render and this one. So I'm going to zoom in a bit here. And if we jump from slot 3 to slot 2, you can see all the detail just sort of disappeared here. So let's jump back to 3. Significant difference in terms of how real this object starts to look. So just by adding those 2 additional textures and doing a little bit of configuration, this looks significantly better. Now, you could do the same thing for the wood. I think in this case, the wood is super high polished wood in terms of it being an object that's probably very expensive and has a lot of craftsmanship. But if it's older wood, you'd have a normal map that sort of highlights ridges in the wood or imperfections. A normal map in our case might really highlight this part receiving some shadow from the light, but I don't think it's going to add a whole lot for our object. But if you have a texture that's different and you want to go ahead and add a normal map to that, you can go ahead and do that. For me, I'm just going to add this to the leather, and I think it looks good as is. So with that, I think that's really all we need to call this particular render finished.